I was pushed down the stairs, not by a stranger, but by the very son I raised with my own hands, all because I discovered the secret they'd been hiding for years, my entire life savings, gone. If you think this is just another ordinary family story, you're wrong. Subscribe now to follow more gripping episodes from us. The morning mist hung like a breath over the sloping hills of Pine Hill Valley, curling around the pine trees and tiled roofs like fingers unwilling to let go. Helen Moore stood quietly at the edge of her porch, one hand resting on the banister, the other clutched around a thermos of lukewarm tea she had barely touched. Her suitcase waited patiently by the door, 74 years of life tucked into 2 bags and 1 wrinkled paper folder labeled important. She had lived here alone since Charles passed away 20 years ago, raised Jason here, buried her dreams here, and watered 100 hydrangeas just to keep the silence company. Today she was leaving. The wooden steps groaned as she made her way down to the garden gate, where Mrs. Lon, her neighbor of more than 3 decades, stood holding out a red cloth-wrapped parcel. "Take this, Helen," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Homemade ginger preserves. I know you like them with your tea." Helen took the bundle with trembling hands. "Thank you. I'll miss our afternoons." "We'll miss you too," Mrs. Land said, voice soft. "It won't be the same without you here." Helen's gaze swept the street. The neighbors' children peeked out behind a gate. Mr. Two across the road waved slowly from his porch. These were not just houses. They were a rhythm of life, familiar, comforting, safe. The taxi pulled up grumbling at the curb. The driver began strapping her luggage to the roof rack with practiced indifference. Helen didn't look back. 3 hours later, the world shifted. The city of Southridge, with its steel skyline and ceaseless energy, swallowed Helen whole. Cars honked without rhythm. Motorbikes threaded dangerously between buses. Sidewalks were lined with cafes packed with young people who never looked up from their glowing screens. Helen clutched her purse tighter. When the cab finally rolled to a stop outside the gates of Eastbrook Estates, a gated suburban community with cookie-cutter homes and trimmed hedges, she took a deep breath. Her fingers tightened around the door handle. And there he was, Jason, waving from the steps of a cream-colored house with high windows and symmetrical landscaping. "Mom," he called out, jogging down to greet her. He looked healthier than she remembered, clean-shaven polo shirt tucked neatly, car keys dangling from his finger like an accessory. His hug was firm, cheerful. "It's good to see you." "You look great," he said, lifting her suitcase with ease. "Not bad for 74, Helen replied with a nervous smile. From the doorway, Camille emerged like a scene from a lifestyle magazine. Flowy blouse, polished nails, her black hair in a glossy wave. "Helen," she beamed, stepping forward to kiss Helen's cheek lightly. "We're so happy you're here. Jason's been talking about this for months." Helen returned the smile, slightly overwhelmed. "It's lovely to see you, dear." Camille smelled like expensive perfume and eucalyptus. She took Helen's smaller bag and led her inside with the smooth efficiency of someone who didn't like things out of place. The house was spotless, cool tile floors, soft lighting, minimalist decor with tasteful accents, photographs of travel, abstract art, neutral colors everywhere. Not a book out of place, not a single dish in the sink. Jason gave her the tour. "So here's the kitchen, there's the laundry room, and this." He opened a door near the back of the house, "is your room." Helen stepped inside. It was small but immaculate. A twin bed, a wardrobe, a writing desk. White curtains with gray trim, a small vase of artificial orchids on the windowsill. "We converted the study," Camille explained, smiling. "We figured it was more important to have you here than to have a space for our books." "Thank you," Helen whispered. Dinner that night was grilled salmon with asparagus, mashed sweet potatoes, and a small glass of wine. Camille did most of the talking about her work as a marketing consultant, about their recent trip to Hoi An, about the renovations she was considering for the guest bathroom. Jason nodded, occasionally chiming in. Helen listened, smiled, said thank you more times than she could count. When Jason raised his glass and said, "To new beginnings," Helen's heart squeezed tight. She wanted to believe it. Over the next few days, the rhythm of the house revealed itself. Jason left early every morning. "Meetings," he said. Logistics is a 24/7 kind of beast. He kissed Camille on the cheek, patted Helen's shoulder, and disappeared in his black SUV. Camille worked from home. Remote branding work, she explained with a sigh and a smile. Non-stop calls, deadlines, revisions. But I love it. She floated through the house, barefoot, laptop in hand, voice low but firm as she spoke into her Bluetooth earpiece. Helen made a quiet effort to stay out of her way. By the third day, Helen found herself washing the breakfast dishes. No one asked her to. The kitchen was already gleaming, but something about doing it felt familiar, grounding. The next morning she mopped the floor. Camille didn't comment. That evening she folded Jason's shirts and ironed Camille's dresses. It wasn't expected, but it was accepted. On Saturday, Helen cooked breakfast omelets, toast, coffee, just the way Jason used to like it. He took one bite and smiled. Just like when I was in high school, Camille added. You really didn't have to do all this, Helen, but thank you. Helen smiled, grateful to be useful, grateful to be noticed. That night she found herself scrubbing the guest bathroom, on her knees, wearing gloves, humming an old song from decades past. When she stood up and looked around the spotless room, her chest filled with something quiet and strange. Was it pride or was it displacement? On Sunday, Jason was home for the first time in a week. Helen made braised pork belly, his favorite dish growing up. At dinner, Camille lit a soy candle and poured wine. Jason sat down, took a bite, and closed his eyes in mock ecstasy. This is insane. Mom, you're spoiling us. Helen blushed. I just wanted to cook something familiar. Camille smiled. Well, we're certainly not complaining. Jason leaned back in his chair, cradling his wine glass. I think this is really going to work, Mom. You here, us together. I know it's an adjustment, but it feels right, doesn't it? Helen looked at him, eyes soft. Yes, she said, and in that moment she meant it, even if her hands were already tired, even if Camille's smile felt a little too perfect. Even if somewhere inside a quiet voice whispered, You're not a guest, you're a fixture. Be careful not to fade into the furniture. She ignored the voice. Because Jason was here, because she had chosen this, because it was still early, and hope even at 74 had not yet let go of her hand. It started with a smile. Camille stood in the kitchen one Tuesday morning, her makeup, flawless hair tucked behind one ear, tapping her fingers rhythmically against her ceramic coffee mug. Helen had just placed a plate of eggs and toast on the table. Jason was lacing up his shoes by the front door. You know, Camille said casually, we've been meaning to talk to you about something. Helen paused, spatula still in hand. Camille offered a sweet, non-threatening smile. It's about the house expenses. Jason didn't look up. He was focused on tying the second shoe. Camille continued. We're so glad you're here, really. You've helped so much. Things feel more balanced. But, well, you know how things are. The economy. Gas, groceries, bills, everything's going up. It's a lot for two people to carry on their own. Helen nodded slowly, unsure of where this was going, though she had a growing idea. I know you're on a fixed income, Camille added delicately. But if you could just pitch in a little for the household costs, nothing formal, of course. Just whatever you can manage. Cash is fine. Jason finally chimed in, voice muffled as he stood up. Only if it's not too hard for you, Mom. But yeah, every bit helps these days. The words came easily as if rehearsed. Helen blinked, then gave a faint smile. Of course. I want to do my part. Camille's smile widened. Great, I knew you'd understand. Jason kissed his wife's cheek, tossed a distracted love you, Mom over his shoulder, and walked out the door. That afternoon, Helen took her handbag into her room, sat at her desk, and slowly opened the zipper pouch where she kept her pension cash. She removed a few crisp bills, just under a third of her monthly stipend, and placed them in a plain envelope. There was no mention of how much, no agreement, no ledger. Just trust. She handed the envelope to Camille without ceremony. Camille accepted it as if it were a restaurant bill she'd forgotten existed. Thanks, Helen, she said breezily. You're a gem. And that was that. The requests kept coming, but never directly. Camille would drop comments like breadcrumbs across the week. Electric's through the roof this month. Jason's car needs new tires. Grocery prices are insane right now. Helen would nod, purse her lips, and find a way to quietly adjust. It wasn't that she felt tricked. Not yet. Not exactly. But something about the informality, the The vague expectation, like she had silently signed a contract no one bothered to write down, settled uneasily in her gut. Still, she told herself this was how families worked. Everyone pitched in. The next week, Helen was rinsing spinach leaves in the sink when Camille walked into the kitchen holding one of her blouses. "There's a stain," she said flatly. "I think it came from the detergent. It smells weird, too." Helen turned, hands still dripping. "I'm sorry. I used the same one I've always used." Camille cut her off. "It's fine. I'll just take them to the cleaners from now on. They know what they're doing." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Helen felt the sting in her chest long after Camille left the room. Later that evening, Helen was sweeping the hallway. Camille stood at the entrance to the kitchen, arms crossed. "You don't have to do that every day, you know," she said. "The house isn't dirty." Helen smiled faintly. "I don't mind. I like keeping busy." Camille shrugged and disappeared upstairs. Helen finished sweeping anyway. One night, Jason came home late, his eyes heavy from work. Helen had made his favorite stew. The smell had filled the house for hours. Camille curled up on the couch with her tablet, didn't move when Jason walked in. "Smells amazing," he said, dropping his bag by the door. Helen beamed. Camille looked up. "By the way, the rice cooker overcooked again. We might need a new one." "I'll look into it," Jason replied. Helen said nothing. She had used the same rice cooker for years. The rice had been fine. The next morning, Helen found herself triple-checking the stovetop after making oatmeal. Her hands shook slightly when she turned the knobs to off. A comment from the night before echoed in her ears. "You almost let the soup boil over again. I caught it just in time." She hadn't, but she didn't argue. Instead, she whispered, "I'm sorry to no one." By the end of the month, Helen had handed Camille 3 envelopes. No receipts, no questions. Camille always took them with a smile, kissed her on the cheek, and said something cheerful like, "This really helps, Helen. You're the best." Jason never asked. At breakfast one morning, Helen offered to do the laundry. Camille's fork paused midair. "Actually, I prefer to do it myself. I have a system." Helen nodded and stirred her coffee. After Camille left the kitchen, Jason looked up from his phone and said, "Don't take it personally. She's just particular about her clothes." Helen smiled. "Of course, I understand." But understanding didn't stop the feeling. The slow, creeping sensation that she was becoming a shadow. A quiet presence that filled the empty spaces between conversations, the empty rooms when they weren't home. She had started talking to herself, just under her breath. Little things. "Don't forget the tea. Put the lid back on. Careful with the glass." It was easier than silence. One afternoon, Helen walked into the living room to find Camille on a video call. She was laughing loudly and said, "No, I swear it's like living with a ghost sometimes. She just glides around folding things, cleaning like she's trying to earn her keep in silence." Helen froze. She hadn't meant to hear that. She backed away quietly before Camille noticed. That night, she folded the laundry slower. She lingered in her room longer. She didn't eat dinner. Jason never asked why. The next week, she tripped slightly while mopping the kitchen. Her knee hit the tile with a thud. Camille rushed in not to help but to check the floor. "Careful," she said sharply. "If you break something or yourself, we're the ones who'll have to deal with it." Helen nodded. "I'll be more careful." Camille stared at her for a beat longer than necessary, then turned and left. On Thursday, Jason came home with 2 paper bags and an apologetic smile. Camille's boss gave her a bonus, he said. So we splurged a little. From the bags, he pulled out a set of crystal wine glasses and a cashmere shawl. Camille came down moments later, kissed his cheek, and squealed like a child. Helen smiled at them both. That night, she made chicken stew. Camille didn't eat. "Too oily," she said. She ordered Thai food instead. Sundays used to be family days. That had been the plan anyway. Jason promised dinners together, conversations, memories. But now Sundays were either too busy or too quiet. Camille had brunches with friends. Jason caught up on sleep. Helen made sandwiches no one ate. She sat on the porch drinking tea, watching the street. The neighbors waved occasionally. No one came to visit. She didn't mind the silence, but she missed being seen. The mail came mid-afternoon. Helen fetched it daily, a habit she liked. Small control in a house that wasn't hers. Bills, flyers, a fashion magazine. Then one day she found an envelope. No name, no return address, just a bank logo in the corner. She frowned. It wasn't addressed to her. She placed it neatly on the entryway table. Later, when she passed by, it was gone. Camille never mentioned it. That night, Helen lay awake. Her room was dark, but she could see the outline of her suitcase in the corner, the one she hadn't unpacked fully, just in case. She thought of Pine Hill Valley, of the wind in the trees, of the way Mrs. Lon always left her light on until Helen's porch light went off. She thought of the hydrangeas. Then she thought of her hands dry from constant washing, her knees still sore from the fall, her pension thinner every month, and of the words Camille said on the phone, like a ghost. Helen turned on her side eyes wide open. She didn't cry. She had done that already. Now she just waited for morning. By the time breakfast came, she had decided to be smaller. She boiled water silently, steeped tea without letting the spoon clink, moved like mist through the house, invisible, and that somehow felt like safety. The laptop died on a rainy Wednesday. Helen had just finished sweeping the kitchen when she decided to sit down and reread one of her favorite ebooks. Something light, something familiar. But when she pressed the power button, the screen remained black. She checked the cord, tried again. Nothing. She stared at the dark screen for a long time, her fingers still resting on the keyboard. It wasn't just a machine. It was her window to the world, her books, her letters, her movies, her sense of control in a house where she was mostly invisible. That evening, while Camille stood at the kitchen island scrolling her phone with a glass of white wine in hand, Helen gathered her courage. "Camille," she said softly, "my laptop stopped working. It's old, I know, but I wondered if maybe I could use a small part of my monthly contribution to buy a basic one. Nothing fancy, just something to read on, keep myself occupied." Camille didn't look up. Her thumb paused for half a second before continuing to scroll. "Oh, Helen, that's not really possible right now. Things are super tight this month. Jason's insurance renewal, mortgage payments, utilities." She sighed. "I'm juggling everything as it is." Helen nodded, lips pressed together. "Of course, I understand." Camille smiled, then finally meeting her eyes. "Maybe in a few months. Right now, we really need to focus on keeping up." Helen whispered a thank you and returned to her room. But that night, as she passed through the hallway to get a glass of water, she noticed a box on the dining table, unopened, tied with a sleek black ribbon. A small envelope sat beside it with the words, "To me from me," written in a playful cursive. The next morning, Camille came downstairs wearing a rose gold wristwatch, shiny new, unmistakably expensive. A week later, it was a butter-soft leather purse with designer initials stamped on the front. Helen said nothing. But something quiet and sharp began to settle in her chest. The first envelope arrived a few days later. Helen fetched the mail from the front gate like she always did. Bills, brochures, a real estate flyer, and one slim white envelope unmarked except for a generic banking logo in the corner. There was no recipient name, no return address. Curious, she placed it carefully on the console by the door. By mid-afternoon, Camille had already taken it. Nothing was said. The next week, another envelope appeared, same size, same logo, still no name. This time, Camille didn't collect the mail until evening. Helen kept the envelope with her, sitting in the sunroom, flipping through a crossword book as if it were a normal day. Camille breezed in, hair pulled back in a bun, earbuds in. "Mail?" she asked casually. Helen handed over the stack without a word. Camille took one glance at the banking envelope, and her fingers visibly tensed. She tucked it beneath a magazine and left the room. Helen watched her go. The third envelope came during a light drizzle. Helen took it to her room this time, not to hide, but to understand. She turned the envelope over in her hands, smooth, clean, machine-pressed. She opened it slowly, carefully peeling back the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, a printed bank statement. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but the contents were explicit monthly deposits, all identical in amount, all labeled personal contribution. The receiving account was listed in bold Camille Moore, private checking. Helen's breath caught in her throat. She reread the statement, then again. The deposits matched almost exactly what she had been giving Camille every month in cash. There were no additional notes, no context, just the stark math of transaction history. Helen sat motionless in her chair for a long time, the paper trembling in her hand. The rain tapped gently on the window like a metronome to her spiraling thoughts. Was this a mistake? Was someone trying to tell her something? If so, who and why anonymously? She tucked the paper back into the envelope and slid it between the pages of an old novel on her bookshelf. Then she made herself a cup of tea, her hands shaking as she poured the water. Jason came home late that night. He was tired, distracted, said something about the shipment delays in the Midwest. Helen smiled, nodded, handed him a plate of reheated lasagna. He didn't ask why her hands were cold. The next envelope came a few days later. Camille didn't even ask for the mail. Helen took it straight to her room. Same layout, same typeface. This time the statement showed an influx of a large amount, over $3,000 split across 2 weeks. One deposit from J. Moore primary account, the other again marked as personal contribution, all transferred to Camille's private checking. Helen's lips parted, but no sound came. A part of her mind resisted. This couldn't be what it looked like. She must be misreading something. There had to be an explanation. And yet, Jason had no idea she was giving Camille cash. Jason never even talked about money. Camille handled all of it. Helen stared at the envelope. The quiet act of reading those lines felt like a betrayal. Like a curtain had lifted and the air behind it was colder than she imagined. The next morning, Camille walked into the kitchen holding her phone, giggling at something on the screen. She was wearing a new silk robe, sky blue with a floral trim. Helen sipped her tea and tried not to stare. "Good morning," Camille said. "I'm heading to the salon in an hour. Let me know if you need anything." Helen smiled politely. "Thank you." Camille poured herself a cup of green juice from the fridge, turned on her heels, and disappeared down the hall. Helen turned back to the window, but the mist outside was no longer calming. It was thick, distant, like a veil she couldn't see through anymore. By the end of the week, there were 5 envelopes hidden inside Helen's bookshelf. 5 pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed. No sender, no name, just quiet documentation placed deliberately into her hands. Who was sending them? A neighbor, a whistleblower, a warning. And what exactly were they warning her of? That she was being used, that Jason was being lied to, that Camille had something to hide. Helen didn't know what to do with the answers she didn't have. So she waited. She watched. And every night she stared at the shadows in her ceiling and asked herself the same question. What if I'm right? Then came a shift. Camille's tone changed barely at first. Sharper inflections, tighter smiles. Questions that sounded more like commands. Could you double-check the water filter next time? I prefer the whites done on delicate if you're going to do them. The trash goes out Tuesday mornings, not Mondays. That's why it was missed. Jason remained indifferent. He was always busy, always late. He still kissed Camille hello, thanked Helen for the meals, but never stayed in a room long enough to feel the air change. Helen became silent, strategic, careful. She stopped folding Camille's clothes. She stopped offering to do anything except what was asked. And even then, only exactly what was asked. She also stopped handing Camille envelopes. Instead, she tucked the cash in her drawer and said, "I'll get it to you in a day or 2. I'm waiting on a friend to repay me for something." Camille raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Helen wasn't sure why she lied, only that it felt necessary. One afternoon, as Camille left for an errand, Helen found herself alone in the kitchen. On the counter was Camille's tablet, still unlocked. Helen stared at it. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Then she turned away. She wasn't ready. Not yet. That evening, Jason asked about her day. Helen said it was fine. He nodded, kissed her forehead, and said, "I'm glad you're here, Mom." Helen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She wondered how long before Jason noticed the cracks in his own foundation. She wondered if he ever would. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of quiet day that stretched like taffy, long, sticky, and slow. Camille had gone to meet a friend at a spa across town. Jason was on another out-of-state work trip, this time in Denver, expected back the following Friday. The house was hushed, the kind of hush that doesn't come from peace but from vacancy. Helen sat in the sunroom, the air cool around her ankles. Her tea had gone cold, her mind flicking back to the growing pile of envelopes hidden in her bookshelf. Something wasn't right. She had felt it for weeks now, no months. A feeling like standing on a creaking floorboard in a dark attic. Camille had left her tablet on the couch again, but Helen didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, she walked to the hallway cabinet, the one with Bill's user manuals and old receipts. Camille usually kept it locked, but today the drawer sat slightly ajar, as if someone had forgotten or stopped caring. Helen stood there a moment, pulse quickening. She reached in. Old magazines, a warranty folder, a thick manila envelope labeled "Personal, do not discard." Her hands trembled as she pulled it out and unfolded the papers inside. The top sheet was a loan agreement. Loan amount, 3,000 VND. Borrower, Jason Moore. Purpose property investment. Disbursed. To Camille Moore, personal checking. Signed, Jason Moore. Jason. Helen's breath hitched. She read it again. The numbers blurred for a second. The weight of the zeros pressed down on her chest. But it wasn't just the figure that made her stomach turn, it was the signature. It wasn't Jason's. She had seen his signature on birthday cards, school permission slips, the back of checks. His loops were always tight, the J sharp and angular. The one on this paper was rounded, almost hesitant, unfamiliar. She flipped to the next page. A bank transfer form, the account listed under Camille's name, personal, not joint, not business. She kept reading several pages of the same story. The loan had been approved 3 months ago. Jason had been on the road almost the entire time. There were no repayment logs, no receipts, no investment portfolios. Just a hole, a void, where millions had disappeared into silence. Helen felt dizzy. Her heart pounded in her ears. She gripped the table for support. This wasn't just deception. This was betrayal, documented, signed, hidden, and Jason had no idea. She returned the documents to the envelope, slid them back into the drawer exactly as she found them, and pushed it shut until it clicked. Then she walked to the kitchen sink and splashed cold water on her face. Her reflection in the window looked hollow, ashen. She sat on the edge of her bed for almost an hour, hands clasped tightly, trying to figure out what to do. Her mind spun. How do you tell your son that his wife might have forged his signature? How do you confront someone who's been smiling at you while stealing behind your back? How do you stay quiet when silence might cost someone their future? She didn't know the answer, but she was about to find out what happened when you tried. That night, Camille returned home just before 9. The scent of eucalyptus trailed behind her, a faint manufactured calm. She tossed her keys onto the console and walked straight into the kitchen where Helen was wiping the counter with a cloth she didn't remember picking up. Camille opened the fridge, took out a bottle of flavored water, and turned. Their eyes met. Something in Camille's expression changed. Slightly. A flicker of tension, recognition. "I know what you're doing," she said suddenly, flatly. Helen blinked. "Excuse me." Camille took a slow sip from the bottle. "You've been snooping, looking at things that don't belong to you." "I was tidying the drawer," Helen replied, voice calm but firm. "You're lying," Camille snapped. "You think I don't notice when things are moved? You think I'm stupid." Helen stepped back. "I found documents with Jason's name on them. Loans, transfers, accounts in your name. He doesn't know, does he?" Camille's lips curled into something that wasn't a smile. "You're playing a dangerous game, Helen." "No," Helen said quietly. "I'm not playing anything." Camille took a step forward. "Listen carefully. I don't care how old you are. You don't get to walk into my house, take my money, and dig through my life. You're here because I let you be here. You think Jason's going to believe you after the way you've been acting, reading too many crime novels in that dusty little room." "I haven't told him anything yet," Helen whispered. "Then don't," Camille hissed, "or you'll regret it." There it was, naked, threat sharpened and unsheathed. Helen stood frozen for a second, and then something inside her snapped, quietly, not with rage but with resolve. "I won't lie for you," she said, voice trembling but unyielding. "Not to Jason, not to myself." Camille laughed. "Then pack your things." Helen flinched. "You're kicking me out." "You don't belong here anymore," Camille said coldly. "Jason won't stop me. Trust me." An hour later, Helen stood in the hallway, a small suitcase by her side. Her coat was draped over her arm. Rain pattered against the windows like fingers tapping for attention. Jason had just walked in. His face looked tired, drawn. His suitcase was still in his hand when Camille turned to him with an air of false concern. "She's not well," she said softly. "She's confused, paranoid." "I walked into the study and found her going through your files." Jason looked at Helen, then at Camille. "Mom," he asked, confused. "I found a loan agreement," Helen said slowly. "In your name. But it wasn't your signature." The money went to Camille. Jason blinked, then frowned. What are you talking about? Camille jumped in. See, this is what I mean. She's delusional. She thinks I'm stealing from you. She thinks I'm manipulating the finances. She needs help. Helen opened her mouth to speak, but Jason raised his hand slightly, not to silence her, but to step back, to pause. The hesitation was worse than anger. Jason sighed and rubbed his temple. I just got home. I don't know what's going on. Camille walked over, placed a hand on his arm. She's been acting strange for weeks, talking to herself, locking the door, reading the same envelope over and over again. I think she's slipping. Helen stepped back as if she'd been struck. Jason turned to her, not angry, just tired. Maybe it's best if you take a break, Mom. Maybe a few days at Aunt Lily's or a friend's place just to rest. Rain battered the window behind them like an audience gasping in slow motion. A few days, Helen asked, voice brittle. Camille stepped in again, arm around Jason. We'll call a cab. I'll help you pack. No need, Helen said. She picked up her suitcase, walked slowly to the door. Her shoes echoed faintly on the tile floor. Jason didn't follow. Camille didn't apologize. She opened the umbrella, stepped into the downpour, and felt the cold wind slice across her face like a blade. It wasn't until the gate clicked shut behind her that she allowed her shoulders to shake. But she didn't cry. Not then. Because what hurt wasn't just the betrayal. It was that when given the choice between his wife's lies and his mother's truth, Jason chose silence. And silence was its own kind of answer. The rain didn't stop. It chased Helen down the street like it knew where she was going, even if she didn't. She dragged her suitcase behind her, the wheels squeaking against the soaked pavement, one stubborn and clicking with every turn. Her thin coat clung to her shoulders. Her shoes were waterlogged. The city lights blurred behind the wet veil that covered her glasses. For the first time in decades, Helen Moore had nowhere to go. She stopped beneath an overhang outside a pharmacy, panting slightly, her breath fogging in the cold night. She tried calling Lily, her distant cousin, but the line rang endlessly and cut off. She thought about sitting down right there on the step in the rain, but something inside her refused to surrender that way. Then she remembered a place, a vague memory from a poster she saw on a bulletin board once months ago. A Center for Senior Assistance Meals Shelter Temporary Support. It wasn't much, but it was something. She clutched her suitcase tighter and began walking again. By the time she arrived, the rain had turned to mist. The sky above Southridge was gray heavy with what had been said and what hadn't. The small building stood nestled between two apartment complexes, quiet and almost hidden like a secret for the forgotten. A brass sign outside read St. Agnes Community Center for Elder Support. She hesitated only a second before stepping inside. Warm air hit her face. Not extravagant, just kind. The kind of warmth that came from old radiators and overworked volunteers. The lobby smelled like lemon-scented cleaner and black coffee. Behind a folding table, a receptionist looked up from a clipboard. Her expression softened when she saw Helen. "Ma'am, do you need help?" Helen tried to answer, but her throat caught. The words felt too heavy. The woman stood and gently took the suitcase from her. "Let's get you a towel and some tea first, okay?" Helen nodded, grateful. They led her to a small lounge with cushioned chairs, mismatched blankets, and a television set on mute. Someone handed her a warm mug. Another brought her dry socks. She sat in silence, letting the warmth seep into her bones, trying not to let her hands shake, or cry, or think. And then she heard a voice, familiar, rich, gentle. "I'll be damned, Helen Moore." She looked up. At first, she didn't recognize him. Time had reshaped his face, thinned his hair, softened the lines around his eyes. But the voice, the posture, the slight dimple when he smiled, unmistakable. Alan Whitmore," he said, stepping closer with a stunned grin. "From Mrs. Carlyle's literature class. You wrote that poem about the snowman and everyone cried for a week." Helen let out a sound that was part laugh, part gasp. She stood then, nearly collapsed as emotion overwhelmed her. Alan reached forward and steadied her. "I'll get another mug," he said. "You're not telling me anything until you've had real tea." They sat together in the corner of the lounge, away from the others. Alan poured from a chipped porcelain pot, his hands steady, his voice low. "I volunteer here twice a week," he explained. "After my wife passed, I needed somewhere that didn't echo every night. Helen nodded, wrapping her hands around the mug. "I didn't know where else to go," she said softly. They told me to leave. My son, his wife." Alan didn't interrupt. He watched her gently with a patience forged in years of silence and waiting. "I thought I was part of their family. I gave them everything I had left. My pension, my time. I cleaned, I cooked, I kept quiet. I wanted to feel needed." Her voice cracked. "And they used me, lied to me." Alan leaned forward. "What happened?" So she told him. Everything. The envelopes, the forged signature, the threats. Jason's silence, the rain, and the crushing weight of walking away with no one to tell it to. By the end of her story, Helen's hands trembled. Her cup had gone cold. Her voice faded into a whisper. I think I was in the way." Alan didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he placed his own mug down and opened his leather satchel. From inside, he pulled out a small notebook, the kind with spiral binding and lined pages. "You still have the documents?" he asked quietly. Helen reached into her suitcase and pulled out the zippered pouch. She hadn't opened it since that night. She handed it to him without a word. Alan unfolded each sheet, slowly reading with a practiced eye. The bank statements, the loan agreement, the transfer slips. He looked up. His eyes were sharp now, focused. "This isn't just family drama, Helen," he said calmly. "This is fraud and embezzlement. If what you're telling me is true, and I believe you, this woman forged a loan in your son's name, laundered money through personal accounts, and used your silence to cover it up." "I didn't know what to do," Helen said, voice shaking. "I didn't want to ruin Jason's life." Alan tapped his fingers against the table, thinking. Then he leaned closer. "What if you didn't say anything, not directly? Not to him? What if someone else did?" Helen's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" He gave a faint smile. "We send it anonymously. Not to Jason. To the bank's risk compliance department. To his company's internal audit team. They're obligated to follow up. They'll trace it. They'll find the inconsistencies. And if they don't, they will," Alan said simply. "That's what these departments exist for. The trick is making sure the documents reach the right hands quietly." Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she whispered, "We send anonymous letters." Alan nodded. "No return address, no fingerprints, no handwriting, just truth. Let the systems do what they're designed to do." Helen blinked. For the first time in days, she felt something shift in her chest, not anger, not grief. Something cleaner, clearer, purpose. "We send them one at a time," Alan continued. "Each week, a new envelope, just enough to make someone dig. And if we're careful, Jason will never know it came from you." Helen felt tears rising, but she swallowed them. "And if he finds out?" she asked. Alan looked at her gently. "Then at least he finds out the truth." They spent the next 2 hours crafting the plan. Alan would type the documents into clean PDF files. No scans, no handwriting. He had access to a public printer at his library shift on Thursdays. They'd mail them from different boxes around the city. Each envelope would contain only one piece of evidence, strategically selected, meticulously arranged. Helen would stay at the center for a few days, rest, recover. In the meantime, Alan would begin assembling the first round of letters. As she handed him the pouch, something in her hand lingered. "I don't want revenge," she said softly. Alan nodded. "I know this isn't revenge. This is air. For the truth to breathe." Helen exhaled. For the first time in weeks, the tightness in her chest loosened. Not completely, but enough. Enough to feel the warmth of tea again. Enough to remember her name. Enough to fight quietly. With envelopes. It started with a white envelope on a Wednesday morning. Jason Moore was halfway through his first cup of coffee at his office desk when he noticed the unmarked letter tucked between a stack of reports. There was no sender, no markings, only his name typed cleanly across the center. He frowned, peeled it open, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printed bank transaction log. He stared at it. 3 large monthly deposits, all titled personal contribution, all traced from an unidentified cash source into Camille Moore's private account. Jason blinked, confused. There was no explanation, no context. He assumed it was a mistake. But the next envelope arrived Friday, then another the following Monday, each one more specific. A loan agreement, a forged signature, A money trail leading not to investments or bills, but to high-end purchases and private accounts. By the fourth envelope, Jason wasn't just confused. He was disturbed. At first, he tried to rationalize it. Camille handled their finances. She was organized, methodical. Maybe this was part of a savings plan she hadn't mentioned, or a gift. A transfer, but the amounts were large, too large. And the name on the loan his, except it wasn't his signature. His actual signature, the one he used every day, was lean, tight, efficient. The one on the documents in the envelopes was sloppy, rounded, imitated, poorly. He didn't confront Camille right away. Instead, he went to their bedroom that night while she showered and opened the drawer where she kept important documents, neatly stacked receipts, tax returns, and a folder labeled household accounts. He flipped through it. The loan wasn't there, nor were the bank statements. What he found instead was a credit card bill that nearly made him gasp. Luxury boutiques, online designer auctions, spa retreats, all within the last 90 days. The same period his mother had been in the house. The same period Camille told him they were barely managing. Jason returned to work the next day with a headache throbbing in his temples. That morning, a new envelope waited on his desk. This time it wasn't a document. It was a note, typed, anonymous. Check the signature on page 3 of the loan agreement. Compare it to your tax return from last year. Someone's lying to you. The bank is next. So is the truth. Jason sat very still. He didn't know who was sending the letters, but he knew now they weren't lying. Meanwhile, at the Citibank's headquarters, another story was unfolding. The Risk Compliance Department received their own set of documents, packaged plainly, each file clipped and labeled, no return address. Inside were loan applications, deposit trails, account comparisons, highlighted signatures. A junior analyst flagged it. Within 24 hours, a forensic review was launched, and by day 3, a fraud alert was quietly added to Jason Moore's account. They hadn't called him yet. They were still verifying the forgery. But the signature discrepancy was glaring, obvious, and traceable. Camille knew something was wrong by the way the air changed. Jason had grown quieter, more distant. His answers were clipped. He no longer asked how her day went. He came home late and stared longer at his phone than usual. And then she noticed the drawer, slightly out of place. She panicked. She tore through the filing cabinet. The folders were still there, but her fingers shook as she counted the pages. Something was missing. The loan copy was gone. The printout of the wire transfers gone. Her heart raced. She opened the bedroom closet, reached for her handbag, and dumped it onto the bed. The wallet, lipstick, receipts. She found nothing unusual, but that didn't calm her, because for the first time in weeks she realized someone knew, someone was watching. That night, Camille sat in the living room after Jason went to bed. She drank wine in silence, stared at her phone, opened and closed her banking app over and over again. When she walked past the hallway mirror, her reflection startled her. She looked older, angrier, smaller. The next morning, she checked the mail before Jason could. There was no envelope, but the absence felt louder than its presence. She pulled open every drawer in the kitchen, then the ones in the hallway. She ripped through the filing cabinet again. She even checked the laundry basket, irrational and frantic. Still nothing. But her paranoia only sharpened. Someone was behind this, and she had a sinking suspicion she knew who. That afternoon, Camille took a cab across town. She arrived at St. Agnes Community Center just before lunch. The receptionist smiled kindly at her, assuming she was there for a visit. "I'm here to see Helen Moore," Camille said. The woman hesitated. "I'm sorry, and you are family." They let her in. Helen was in the lounge helping another elderly resident with a crossword puzzle. She looked up when Camille entered, and for a second her face didn't register fear. It registered clarity. Camille waited until the room was empty before stepping forward. Her voice was low, sharp, acidic. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" Helen didn't answer. She placed the crossword book down gently. Camille's jaw clenched. "Was the humiliation not enough? You had to drag us down with you." "I didn't drag anyone," Helen said softly. "I told the truth." Camille leaned closer. Her voice dropped to a hiss. "Do you think he's going to believe you now? After everything, you're senile, broken, a ghost with no home. No one listens to people like you." Helen met her eyes, calm, steady. "Someone did," she said. Camille paled, and in that moment the roles reversed. Helen stood, taller than she had in weeks. You can lie, Camille. You can hide, but paper has memory. Numbers don't forget. You think you've won, Camille spat. Helen shook her head. This isn't about winning. It's about ending the silence. Camille turned sharply and left without another word. But Helen saw it, the tremble in her hand as she reached for the door, the storm in her eyes as it dawned on her. It was already too late. Back in Eastbrook Estates, Jason sat on the edge of the bed, his laptop open, his heart racing. He had just received a call from the bank. They needed to verify a series of documents. They needed to meet in person. They used the word forgery. Jason felt like the walls were closing in. Every inch of certainty he had known the family he thought he was protecting, the woman he thought he loved, was beginning to blur. And as he sat there, the memory of his mother, small, wet, trembling at the door, suitcase in hand, played over and over in his mind like a movie he couldn't turn off. He hadn't defended her. He hadn't even asked her to stay. He just let her go. And now every quiet envelope, every anonymous word, every thread unraveling in front of him led back to her. Jason Moore stood up, threw on his jacket, and left the house with nothing but a name on his lips. Mom. The sun hung low over Southridge City, casting long shadows through the windows of the St. Agnes Community Center. The warm amber glow filtered in across the common room walls as volunteers moved quietly, setting out evening tea, adjusting folding chairs, and fluffing pillows no one had asked them to. Helen sat at a round table near the back corner, crocheting in silence. Her fingers moved methodically, but her thoughts were elsewhere, stretching back through old grief, recent shocks, and the delicate thread of control she'd only just begun to reclaim. Then the door opened, and time paused. Jason stood in the threshold. His coat hung loose over his shoulders, one side drooping as though he'd forgotten to straighten it. His hair was disheveled, as if he'd run his hand through it too many times on the drive over. In his eyes, regret, panic, exhaustion, and something else. That childlike hope only sons carry when they want to make something right, but aren't sure they deserve to. He spotted her. He didn't speak. He just moved. Across the room, past the tables, the volunteers, the kind smiles of strangers who didn't understand the weight of this moment. He stopped 2 feet in front of her and knelt, not out of drama, but out of devastation. Mom, he said, voice cracking, I'm so sorry. Helen didn't answer right away. She set her crochet needle down, folded the yarn over once, and looked at him. Really looked. His eyes were red. His jaw was tense. His hands trembled, slightly clenched in fists on his knees. I didn't believe you, he whispered. I didn't even ask. I let her convince me you were confused, that you were slipping. Helen's voice came calm, quiet. You didn't just let her. You helped her pack my suitcase. Jason winced. I know. You didn't speak, she continued. You stood there while I walked out into the rain with everything I had left. You didn't ask where I'd go. You didn't stop me. Jason dropped his head. Tears hit the tile. I was blind, he said. I thought keeping peace meant keeping quiet. But it wasn't peace. It was her power. He looked up, searching her face. She controlled everything. The money, the stories, me. Helen sat back in her chair. Her eyes not soft, not angry, just clear, clean like morning air after a storm. Do you know how it feels, she asked, to be erased inside your own family? Jason opened his mouth, then shut it, because the answer he knew wasn't his to give. I watched her spend what I gave, Helen said. I watched you thank her for budgeting while I cleaned the floors. I watched my name disappear from every conversation. Jason nodded. I let it happen. Yes, Helen said, you did. He sobbed once, quiet, broken. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't welcome. You were all I had growing up, and I threw you out like a guest who overstayed. She said nothing, because in silence some truths ring louder. I'll fix it, he said suddenly. I'll make it right. I already spoke to the bank. They're launching a full investigation. Camille's been contacted. There's going to be a hearing, possibly charges. He swallowed. It's all unraveling. Helen tilted her head. And what do you want from me, Jason? His breath caught. I want you to come home. Helen leaned forward slowly. Her voice this time was not angry. It was measured, compassionate, sharp. I am home. Jason blinked. You lost my trust, Jason. Not because you were deceived, but because you watched it happen and chose silence. His eyes welled again. I was afraid. So was I, Helen said. But I didn't stay afraid. A moment passed between them, long waited, sacred. and then a voice came from across the room. "You must be Jason." Jason turned to see a man approaching, tall, dignified, gray-streaked hair, and a softness in his gaze that felt oddly familiar. "Alan Whitmore," he said, extending a hand. "I'm a volunteer here, old friend of your mother's." Jason stood slowly, wiped his hands on his jeans, and shook it. "Nice to meet you," he said hoarsely. Alan gestured toward Helen with a warmth that couldn't be faked. "Your mother's stronger than you think. You should be proud of her." "I am," Jason said without hesitation. "I just didn't show it soon enough." Alan nodded, then looked at Helen. "Forgiveness," he said, "doesn't mean returning to the wound. It means learning how not to carry it anymore." Helen gave him a look that held both gratitude and weariness. "Wise words," she said, "but healing is never instant." Alan placed a hand gently on her shoulder, nor should it be. Jason watched the interaction, a small part of him aching at how natural it looked. How safe. "I know I can't erase what happened," Jason said, turning back to her. "But I want to rebuild something new. If you'll let me." Helen studied him, really studied him. Then she said something she hadn't prepared, something that came from a place she thought had long since sealed shut. "You haven't lost me, Jason," she said quietly. "But now you have to learn how to keep me." Jason's face crumpled. Helen stood and took his hand, not fully, not tightly, but enough. A first step. Alan watched from behind, arms folded, face thoughtful. There was no music, no grand reconciliation, no easy button pressed. Just a man who had nearly lost his mother, and a woman who had found her spine in the wreckage. That night, Helen didn't return to Eastbrook Estates. She stayed at the center. Jason didn't ask her to move back in. He knew better now. Instead, he asked for her time, her patience, her voice. Helen agreed to a walk on Sunday, a coffee after that, maybe dinner sometime next week. Small stitches, not enough to cover the scar, but enough to begin weaving again. The letter arrived on a Thursday. It came not to Jason or Helen, but to Camille's inbox. Digital this time. Official. The email bore the watermark of the Southridge Financial Oversight Division with the subject line, "Request for in-person verification, suspicious loan activity." Camille froze at her desk. She clicked it open. The contents were clear, direct. The bank had found discrepancies in her loan file. They requested a verification interview. Immediately. Failure to comply would escalate the case to legal authorities. The blood drained from her face. For 2 days she pretended not to receive it. Claimed her spam filter was broken. Said she needed time to prepare the right paperwork. But time, like truth, had turned against her. By Monday, another letter came, this time from a private legal office, and Jason was CC'd. Camille didn't wait. She ran, left everything. Packed in the middle of the night. A burner phone, a handful of cash. She vanished like fog at sunrise. When Jason woke up, he found the bed empty. The closet stripped, her car gone. A note on the counter said only, "You wouldn't understand, I had no choice." But the law didn't need understanding, it needed accountability. The fallout came fast. The bank froze both their accounts. Jason's name was temporarily cleared of liability, but the damage was done. The house Camille mortgaged under his name had missed 2 payments. A foreclosure notice arrived within days. Jason stood in the middle of their once pristine kitchen, papers spread across the counter, calls from debt collectors pinging his phone every hour. He was underwater, financially, emotionally, spiritually, and everywhere he turned the media was there. The story broke on local news first. Elderly mother defrauded by son's wife. $3 billion VND missing. Then it exploded. Morning talk shows. Legal podcasts. Internet sleuth forums dissected Helen's story frame by frame. Photos of her leaving the center with a gentle smile became symbols of quiet strength. Hashtags trended. Justice for Helen, mother not maid. Jason watched it unfold in silence, in shame. One morning a neighbor crossed the street with a casserole and didn't meet his eyes. By then the house was half-packed. The foreclosure deadline loomed. He had nowhere to go. Helen, meanwhile, walked into the Southridge Police Department wearing her nicest blouse and carrying a binder of evidence. She sat with a detective named Thompson for 3 hours. She handed over the fake loan papers, the forged signatures, screenshots of Camille's purchases, printouts of anonymous tip letters, the original bank statements. Thompson asked questions, precise, patient. Helen answered each one. And when it was done, he looked her in the eye and said, Mrs. Moore, thank you for your bravery. We are officially opening a criminal investigation. Helen nodded. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just exhaled. Because justice wasn't an emotion. It was a process, and it had finally begun. It was just after 6:30 in the evening when Jason stood outside the St. Agnes Community Center, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his eyes heavy from days of sleeplessness. The street behind him was dim and quiet. The weight of foreclosure, betrayal, and headlines that wouldn't stop scrolling beneath his name pressed on his chest like a steel beam. He knocked once. The receptionist didn't recognize him at first, but when he said Helen Moore's name, she buzzed him in. Helen was in the small kitchenette steeping a pot of chamomile tea. She didn't look up when she heard the door, but the way the air shifted, she knew. Mom. She turned slow and measured. Jason stood there, pale, unshaven, smaller than he used to seem. Not physically, spiritually, like the world had deflated him. I didn't know where else to go, he said quietly. Helen placed the tea strainer on a plate, wiped her hands with a cloth, and faced him. What happened to the house? Gone. The bank has it. They said I have 10 days to remove my things. I've been sleeping in my car. I don't know who to call. I have no one. Silence. Long waited. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, wrinkled photo, a picture of him at 8 years old on Helen's shoulders, laughing at some forgotten fairground. I didn't come here to beg, he said. I came here because you're the only person who's ever truly seen me, and right now, I need to be seen. Helen took the photo gently. She looked at it for a long time. Then, without meeting his eyes, she said, "You can stay for dinner." They sat at one of the community tables with Alan passing through, occasionally nodding kindly but giving them space. Helen served soup. Jason barely touched it. I found a place nearby, she said after a while. They rent small units month to month. It's not much, but it's clean. Jason blinked. You already looked? I made calls yesterday. I had a feeling you might show up. He leaned back, eyes stinging. So you'll help me get on my feet again? Helen nodded. I can co-sign the lease, cover the deposit, but after that it's yours to keep, or lose. Jason exhaled. I thought, maybe we could live together again, just until I find my footing. Helen didn't answer. Jason tried again. You don't want me here. Is that it? After everything, you still don't trust me. Helen met his eyes now, steady, clear. Jason, love doesn't mean repeating history. I forgave you, but I won't relive what broke me. His jaw tightened. I'm your son. And I'm your mother, she said. But being a mother doesn't mean being a victim. Not anymore. He stood abruptly. The chair scraped. A volunteer looked over, startled. You think I don't know I messed up, he hissed. You think I haven't been punishing myself every night Camille is gone, my home is gone, my name is a joke on the internet, and now you're telling me I have to do this alone. Helen's voice didn't rise. You've never been alone, Jason. You had me, until you didn't want me. He sat back down slowly, defeated. I just wanted things to go back to the way they were. They can't, she said softly. But we can build something new, separate, stronger. Jason nodded, eyes on his hands. Okay. Later that evening, Helen walked him to the corner. She handed him a piece of paper with the rental address, a name, and a phone number. Start tomorrow, she said. They expect your call. Jason stared at the paper. Thank you. She didn't hug him, but she placed a hand briefly on his shoulder. It said everything. He walked away slowly, and Helen, the woman who had once been invisible in her own home, stood tall in the streetlight, not as a mother lost, but as a woman reborn. They had shared a past, but now they walked different roads, and for the first time that felt okay. The small space on Elm Street had been a laundromat once long ago. The tiles were cracked, the walls stained by decades of steam and silence. But Helen Moore saw more than grime when she stepped inside. She saw potential. She saw peace. She saw a beginning. It was Alan who found the listing. A cheap monthly lease, month to month. Tired but central. Sunlit in the afternoons. The kind of place people might walk past, pause, and wander into without knowing why. They scrubbed it together. She painted the walls a warm, pale yellow, the color of marigold tea. Alan hung lanterns from the ceiling, delicate, floating like memories. The counters were sanded smooth, the shelves lined with porcelain teacups donated by friends at the community center. And when they opened the doors 2 weeks later, a hand-lettered sign swung gently in the breeze. Sunleaf Tea Room, a place to exhale. Helen invested what was left of her pension into the shop. She bought one thing just for herself, a laptop. Brand new, matte silver, lightweight, a symbol more than a tool. She had never owned one before, and when she touched the keyboard that first night, she didn't open it to write emails or track orders. She opened a blank page, typed her name, then the word free. Sunleaf Tea Room became more than a shop. It became a sanctuary. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. An elderly man named George, who hadn't spoken since his wife passed, came in every Friday for jasmine tea and sat with a paperback, tears silently falling down his cheeks. 2 widows brought photo albums. A young single mother brought her toddler, who always crawled under the bamboo tables and squealed with delight. Helen greeted each one like an old friend. She didn't ask their wounds. They gave them freely. Sunleaf didn't sell escape, it sold stillness. And in stillness, healing bloomed. One afternoon, Alan surprised her with a shelf labeled "Letters Never Sent." People were encouraged to leave notes unsent, thoughts, secrets, goodbyes. Folded pieces of paper slipped into envelopes and tucked quietly into the wooden slots. Helen read them when the shop closed. One said, "To the daughter I never got to hold." Another, "To the man who never chose me." And another still, "To myself because I finally matter." Each one was a world. Each one was a piece of her. They kept their routines gentle. Alan brewed the morning pots. Helen arranged the chairs. Local students offered to design a website. A woman donated poetry books. One Sunday morning, just as light spilled through the front windows, a woman in her 50s walked in, nervous, guarded. She looked around, touched the edge of a teacup, and asked, "Do you mind if I just sit?" "Of course not," Helen said. An hour passed. The woman hadn't ordered anything. Then as Helen passed with a tray of oolong, the woman reached out and touched her arm. Her voice shook. "Thank you for making space for people like me." Helen smiled gently. "Like you. People who forgot how to be human for a while." Helen sat beside her, poured a cup without asking. And in that quiet, something holy passed between them. Weeks turned into months. Jason moved into his rental. He called once a week, never to ask, only to share, to listen, to learn. He stopped apologizing. He started changing. Helen watched it happen from a distance, with caution, with hope, but without need. She had finally built a life where her love was offered freely, not traded. One late afternoon, as the last customer left and Alan flipped the sign to closed, a young woman with silver-streaked hair approached Helen. "I heard about you," she said. "About the letters, the tea, the kindness." She hesitated, then stepped forward. "I lost my mother last spring. We never got to say the hard things. This place, it feels like somewhere she would have loved." Helen's eyes softened. "Then she's here now." The woman embraced her, not tightly, not with desperation, with recognition. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting us have this." Helen stood still for a moment. Then she smiled, and not the polite smile she had worn in silence for years, not the practiced smile of a woman trying to survive, but the kind that starts deep in the ribs, the kind that belongs only to the free, the kind that had been buried long ago beneath sacrifice and service and shame, the kind that says, "I am home now." And the sun kept shining through the windows of Sunleaf Tea Room, and laughter returned to her lungs. And nothing, not betrayal, not loss, not time, could take it away again. It was late afternoon when the phone rang. The air inside Sunleaf Tea Room smelled of cinnamon and bergamot, and Helen Moore had just finished shelving a new box of herbal blends when she heard it vibrate against the counter. She picked it up. "Jason." She hesitated for a breath, then answered. "Hi, Mom." His voice was calmer than usual, still a little tired, but lighter, grounded. "I got the job," he said. Helen smiled quietly. "The tech startup." "Yeah, just entry level for now, but they said they like how I think. I'm doing part-time deliveries too, trying to stay ahead of the debt." She could hear the street noise in the background, a siren in the distance, wind through a phone mic. "How are you sleeping?" she asked. "Better," he said. I think I'm starting to forgive myself. It's a weird thing letting go of guilt. You start to see where healing can fit." Helen closed her eyes for a moment. "Let that land." Jason continued. "I want you to know, Mom, you were right. about everything, about boundaries, about what love should look like. She sat slowly. I understand now why you didn't come back, he said, and I respect it, I really do. A long pause. I miss you, he added. I never stopped being your mother, Helen replied, and that was enough. That evening, after Alan closed up the shop and dimmed the hanging lanterns, Helen sat down with a pen and paper. No laptop this time. She wrote slowly, thoughtfully in her deliberate cursive. Dear Jason, you have grown more in the last few months than many people grow in decades. I'm proud of you. But more than that, I see you now clearer than ever as a man willing to become more than his mistakes. You are my son, and I love you. That will never change. But love must never come at the cost of one's own dignity. That was a lesson I learned too late, and now I live it with intention. Sunleaf is my home now, not because it's a building, but because it's a place where I'm not invisible, where my laughter isn't conditional, where my care is not currency. I hope one day you build your own version of this, a space that reflects who you really are, not who you're expected to be. Family, my son, is not defined by obligation. It is chosen day by day in respect, and I choose to love you, always. But I also choose to love myself. With care, Mom. She folded the letter, tucked it into an envelope, and placed it in the drawer by the register. She would send it tomorrow. Later that night, Helen and Alan brewed a pot of lavender mint tea and pulled down the projector screen. The cafe was closed, but still warm with the echoes of the day's kindness. Alan held up a DVD case. Roman Holiday. Helen chuckled. Audrey Hepburn and Gregory Peck. It felt like a good night for it, he smiled. They sat side by side on the soft, worn couch near the bookshelf, a knit blanket across their legs. The film flickered to life. Black and white, classic, timeless. Helen leaned back, eyes reflecting the screen. The scene where Princess Anne rides the Vespa through Rome played, and Helen let out a quiet laugh. A pure one, untethered. And over the soft hum of the projector, her voice rose gently in narration. Family isn't just about blood. It's not about duty or guilt or shared history. It's about who sees you, who respects you, who holds your truth even when it's messy. It's where love shows up without being demanded. Family is the place you choose and the place that chooses you back. Alan looked at her. She didn't need to look back, because she knew he understood. And in that soft cinematic glow, the world outside fell away. There was no past to fix, no pain left to chase, just the tea, the film, the man beside her, and a heart that finally felt whole.